Hello and welcome again to That History Dude. Today we're going to be covering the House of Wessex, going from Alfred the Great down to Edward the Confessor. And we will be touching on, obviously, Canute, his family, and Emma of Normandy, along with William the Conqueror and the Dukes of Normandy, with their involvement in the invasion of 1066. There's a lot of English history here to cover, so let's get started. Now, mind you, most of my videos on my channel have been about Scottish history and Scottish genealogy. I do have some videos also of the Viking invaders and their genealogy, such as with Orkney and the Isle of Man and the Western Isles, which eventually get merged into the Scottish history. So I only thought it fair to also include the Anglo-Saxon history, Norman history, English history, because eventually they do all merge together with the Scottish royal houses, and the genealogy will eventually come together. I was influenced to do this project by the new series called King and Conqueror. If you guys haven't heard of it or haven't seen it, it is on Amazon Prime. It's a good watch. Go ahead and, take a gander. King and Conqueror portrays the last couple years of Edward the Confessor, the invasion of Harold Hardrada, the becoming king with Harold Godwinson, and then eventually William the Conqueror's invasion. Anyways, to begin with, the House of Wessex. House of Wessex, from what we know and can tell, mythologically started with Cerdic, who was a mercenary that was one of the Anglo-Saxon tribe leaders that invaded Britannia after the Romans had pulled out in the 500s. They started taking over what was to be known the Kingdom of Wessex. They were one of the 7 kingdoms, part of the Heptarchy. Now, under Alfred, one of his descendants, Alfred was the first ruler to unite all the Anglo-Saxons together under one banner and realm, and he styled himself as the King of the Anglo-Saxons once he reconquered London from the Danish invaders. So all the Anglo-Saxon people, again, notice that he's not king of the English, he's not king of England, he's king of the Anglo-Saxons. So, beginning with Alfred the Great, we do know that he married a woman named Elswith, who died in 902. Alfred himself, he died by 899. Together, they had many children. They had Ethelthryth, who married Baldwin II, who was Margrave of Flanders. She died in 929, outliving Baldwin, who died in 918. Together, they would go on and have children who would become the Margraves of Flanders. We have Ethelfled, who also died in 918, but married Ethelred, who was alderman of Mercia, who died in 911. We also have a son, Ethelwerd, who died by 922. We have Ethelgifu, the Abbess of Shaftesbury. And we have Edward the Elder, who became king of the Anglo-Saxons and died by 924, and was king after his father had passed. Now, before going on to Edward the Elder and all his marriages and all his children, I do want to point out that Ethelfled, she was the wife of Ethelred, the Elderman of Mercia. He ruled all of Mercia, such as a duke would. Together they had one daughter, Elfwin, Lady of Mercia. Now, she is called Lady of Mercia because after the death of her father, Ethelfled, the mother and wife, would go on to rule in her own right after the death of her husband. And when she died 7 years later, her daughter, Elfwin, would rule as the Lady of Mercia. This is her portrait. She ruled in her own right. The passage of rule from mother to daughter is the only instance recorded in early medieval history in the British Isles. This passage right here, from mother ruling to daughter ruling. And this seldom happened in the later medieval ages. Now, obviously, Elfwin, she did not last long as a ruler of Mercia. Her uncle, Edward the Elder, shortly took Mercia from her within a year. So, Edward the Elder. This is his portrait here. Edward the Elder was king of the Anglo-Saxons. His first marriage was to Egwin, who died by 899. But together they had Athelstan and Edith of Polesworth. Now, Edith is not 100%. Basically, we don't know if she is actually Edward's daughter, if it's the same Edith's. Some sources say that Edward did have a daughter named Edith, but we don't know if it's actually the same Edith. Some sources say no, he did not have a daughter named Edith. This is speculation with this woman. But from what some sources speculate is that Edith married Citric Cake, who was the king of Dublin and of Northumbria, because Edward wanted to make peace with Northumbria because he was dealing with a lot of infighting and he wanted to secure alliances. If you have watched my Ivards video, the Imar, I do have Citric Cake and his ancestry and his descendants that stem from this marriage. So you can go take a look at that video. Edward the Elder, with his second marriage, married Elfled of Wiltshire. Elfled's father was Ethelhelm, the Elderman of Wiltshire. And together they had Edwin, who died by 933, Elfward, who died by 924, and Ethelheld, who was a lay sister. Edgifu, who died by 951, Edheld, who died by 937, and Edith, who died by 946. These were the children of the second marriage. Now, one thing to note, look who they are married to. Edgifu married Charles the Simple, king of West Francia, and together they would, their children, well, child, I should say, was of the Karling dynasty, Louis IV, King of West Francia. Idheld married Hugh Capet, the ancestor of the Capetians, who was Duke of the Franks and died by 956. Now, together they would not have any children. And then Edith, who married Otto the Great, Duke of Saxony, and then he later, after Edith's death, would become Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. But together they did have children who would become part of the Ottonian dynasty and become major players in the Holy Roman Empire. So this was all done because Edward the Elder, and what would become England, wanted to assure himself with continental alliances. Again, as I said, Edward wasn't entirely secure in his ascension to king. He had cousins that were of higher status. But because his victory at the Battle of Farnham in 893, it secured his place. Until again, obviously his cousin revolted and stirred the East Anglian Danes, which is why it's thought that the East Anglian Danes attacked, but not the Northumbrian ones, because his daughter had secured an alliance with Sigtryggr, who again, as I said, was the king of Dublin, Northumbria. So he was fighting one Viking group and not both. So Edward again was successful in this fight, ended up killing his cousin and securing his place as king of the Anglo-Saxons. Now, with his third marriage was Eadgifu of Kent, who was the daughter of Sigehelm, Alderman of Kent. And from that third marriage, we have Edberg, who was a nun. We have Edmund the Magnificent, who officially became King of England. And we have Edred, who is also King of England. This is a portrait of Edmund, and this is a portrait of Edred. Now, after Edward the Elder had died, his first son with his first wife, Athelstan, became King of England. Notice I say King of England. This is a portrait of Athelstan. Athelstan needed to quickly assert himself as king, just as his father did. And again, he did not have the full support. So what he did to show that he was a worthy king was he conquered the last remaining Viking kingdom, York, in 927, making him the first Anglo-Saxon ruler of the whole of England. Now, obviously, him being, a major player and asserting himself as king, after his death, the Vikings would again retake Northumbria. On top of that, in 934, before his death, he invaded Scotland and forced Constantine II and Strathclyde to submit to him. So he became suzerain over the kingdom of Strathclyde and the kingdom of Alba. That's how much of a player he was in the British Isles. But again, all that came to an end when he died. And when he died, his brother, Edmund the Magnificent, became King of England. Now, Edmund, he also was able to expel the Vikings out of York again in 944. And he was able to continue the overlordship of Wales, Scotland, and Strathclyde. But Strathclyde messed up. Strathclyde decided to withhold their fealty to Edmund after his brother had died, Basically, they didn't come to his court to kiss the ring and swear lordship. So Edmund had to show who's boss. He invaded, blinding the two sons of the King of Strathclyde and gifting the kingdom to Malcolm II of Scotland, as long as he could protect it against Viking incursions. So he killed two birds with one stone. Alba was already on the fence about, submitting to Edmund, and Strathclyde had been dealt with, and Wales was scared. So that's why he is named as King of England the Magnificent, because he basically kept the entire British Isles in check. And when he died, and he died in literally one of the most stupidest ways, Edmund was killed by a literal common thief that was trying to rob his steward, and he fought to protect his steward, which was also one of his closest advisors and his best friend. That is how he died. And his brother Edred then became King of England. Edred was a very sickly boy throughout his entire life. It is no wonder he died quickly. But under Edred's reign, the Northumbrians themselves had expelled Eric Bloodaxe and accepted Edred as their king. Edred appointed Oswulf of Bebbanburg to become Ealdorman of Northumbria. So he had an appointed person. And again, the kingdom was still safe under Edred's reign. More so, you could even argue, because the Vikings were gone. The Northumbrians, though descendant of Vikings and of the Anglo-Saxons, they came to see themselves as a unity, as one people. They weren't Vikings or Anglo-Saxons. This is where they start to become English, so to speak. So after Edred's death in 955, the line of succession went to Edmund's children, since Edred himself did not have any children or heirs. Edmund's children were Edwig the All-Fair and Edgar the Peaceful. They would both become kings of England. Edwig, however, was the first king of England. This is his portrait, and he lived from about 940 to 959. He was married to Ælfgifu. Now, this marriage was annulled by the Archbishop of Canterbury due to consanguinity. She was possibly the second great-granddaughter of Ethelred I of Wessex. Ethelred was the older brother of Alfred the Great. So they were cousins of some degree. Now, in medieval Europe at this time, there were many papal dispensations to allow for such marriages. Edwig and his wife Ælfgifu could have definitely have received one, but for some reason, the Archbishop of Canterbury, he was against Edwig, did not want him marrying Ælfgifu, was very against him politically, and did all in his power to stop him in whatever he wanted to proceed in. Anyways, it didn't matter, because Edwig would end up dying fairly young and barely into his reign. So his brother Edgar the Peaceful became King of England. He lived from 943 to 975, and he had 3 marriages. This is his portrait here. Now, Edgar is called the Peaceful because during his reign there were no Viking invasions. There's no turbulence within England. Anything that was happening within England was trivial at best. There wasn't any, political intrigue. There wasn't murders or, any of that sort of, medieval stuff happening. And during his reign, we have the golden age of Anglo-Saxons. And because everything was so peaceful, you also have the Benedictine reforms that were spreading throughout England. That came from the mainland, that came from continental Europe. So Edgar married first Ethelfled Inyeda, who died 962, and from that first marriage we have Edward the Martyr, who would become also King of England later on. From Edgar's second marriage to Wulfrith of Wilton, who died about the year 1000, we have a daughter named St. Edith of Wilton. St. Edith of Wilton, who lived about 961-984. This is her portrait here to the left. She is venerated as a saint in the Catholic, Episcopalian, / Anglican churches, and the Orthodox Church as well. It is said that her thumb did not deteriorate along with her body after her death, and that it was still the same as if she was alive, with flesh, nails, blood, and all, which was one of the miracles that allowed her to become a saint. Anyways, Edgar's third wife was Elfrith of Devon, who lived from about 945 to also about 1000. And from that third marriage, we have Ethelred the Unready. This is where we start getting into the lead up to the mixing with Normandy, the Viking invasions with Canute, and then later on Harold Hardrada. This is where the unstableness of England comes into play. The turbulence, the troubles, the civil unrest. This video is getting to be a bit long, so this would have to be a part 2. But before I end this video, I do just want to make some things known with Edgar's son. So his son, after he had passed away, Edward the Martyr, he reigned as King of England. Edward was murdered under mysterious circumstances. Now, Edward, it is said in some sources that he wanted to fight back against the church and against the Archbishop of Canterbury, which fought against his uncle, Edwig the All-Fair. Edward did not want to be controlled like his uncle was and like his father was. Even though there's a lot of peace, the church had a lot of power during this time. There's some rumor that he was killed by some political opponents. Again, everything is all speculation. No one really knows what happened or how he died. All that we do know is that he was murdered. So I'm going to stop here with Edward the Martyr. And the rest of the video, or the rest of the House of Wessex, I should say, in the history of England, would have to be a part 2.